First of all, welcome to all of you. My name is Jessica Ferne. I am the Director of Global Health Impact at CanWaCH. And I am so excited that we are about to start the second part of this 4-part training session. Before I say a few words, again, for those of you that weren't with us last time, and are just joining us for this session, we do have simultaneous translation available for this training. The instructions to access that are in the email that was sent to you and also up here on the screen. You can visit the URL interpret.world using the code or the token radar coverage, and that will allow you to listen to the session and receive translation throughout. If you're having any difficulties connecting with that, either by the website or via the app, you can contact a colleague of mine, Tina La Rochelle. I'll introduce you more to her in just a second. But welcome. So this session, we're focusing on the radar questionnaire, the open data kit, and data analysis and processing for the radar coverage questionnaire. So in the first session that we had together last week, we heard quite a bit about the open data kit, and I think we're all really excited to dive into get a bit more detail from our colleagues at Johns Hopkins. Before I turn it over to them, we will be using the chat function for questions and answers throughout certainly the first half of this session. So down in the chat box, you can post questions as they come to you in whatever language you wish, and the facilitators will respond to them, or we'll make sure to get them to the top of the list. Later on, for the second half of the session, we will be doing breakout rooms, so that you'll have an opportunity to have some in-depth time with a member of the radar team to ask specific questions that you have and to give your specific feedback. But we want this to be participatory, and we want to encourage you to ask the questions that you have. If you're facing any difficulty, as I said, throughout the session at any point, Tina La Rochelle has CanWaCH technical support next to her name. You can write to her directly, again, in either language, and she'll help you do any troubleshooting that you need to do. These sessions are all being recorded so that they'll be made available to you afterward, and you can share them with your colleagues or other members of your team. It will take us a little bit of time. We're going to release them all at the end of all 4 sessions. So if you're in this session or any of them, you'll get an email from us once they're all available for you to be able to access, along with the tools that are shared here today. Because of that, because of the fact that it's participatory, your name can show up when and if you contribute. So if you prefer to remain anonymous for this session, we encourage you to go over the icon or the image of your screen. At the top right, you'll see 3 dots like an ellipses. If you click on that, you can rename yourself to just the name of your organization if you would prefer. Again, if you're having any difficulties with that, please contact Tina and she can do that for you. And if you have any questions on that, let us know. Finally, in the email that I sent out, I sent a link to the Radar Project website. We can share it again in the chat so that you've got that quick and easily accessible. And then without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ashely Sheffel from Johns Hopkins University and Emily Wilson to tell us a little bit more about what the agenda for today's session is going to look like. Ashely, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. While we're getting the slides up for today, I think we just wanted to go ahead and do a quick round of introductions of the JHU faculty who are on the call for today. So maybe we'll just do a quick round. Talata, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Ashely. So my name is Talata Luis. I co-facilitated the last session. I am a faculty member at Johns Hopkins University, and I work on the radar project as a whole, including the coverage survey. And we also have with us here Melinda Munoz and Abdoulaye Maiga, who are also part of the team here. Melinda, Maiga, if you want to say a little hi, introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Melinda Munoz. I'm an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and I'm the lead for the coverage survey tool development. Maiga?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Abdullah Maiga. I'm a scientist at Johns Hopkins University. I'm also part of a radar coverage tool.
Excellent, thank you so much. And then Emily and Ashely, if you want to introduce yourselves, maybe Ashely first.
I'm Ashely Sheffel. I'm an assistant scientist at Johns Hopkins University and a member of the radar coverage tool team.
Emily?
I'm Emily Wilson. I'm a senior research associate at Hopkins, and I work on some of the data collection and analysis aspects of the radar coverage tool, and we'll be presenting the ODK today.
Great, good luck.
Thanks so much.
Can everyone see a screen that says the radar coverage survey tool?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, thanks. So as Jessica mentioned, our presentation today is going to be covering the Open Data Kit, which is our electronic data questionnaire for the radar questionnaire, as well as our data analysis and processing tools. So our main objectives today are really to introduce and get feedback on the radar questionnaire in ODK, and then also to introduce and get feedback on the radar data management and analysis tools. So this isn't going to be a full training on the actual toolkit, but more an introduction to the tools and then an opportunity to get some feedback on how they might be useful to you and what we might be able to do to improve them or provide some more hands-on experiences to make them more user-friendly. So just a little bit about the agenda for today. We're really going to try to divide the session into two parts. The first half of the session is going to focus on the radar questionnaire in ODK. And we're going to start with an overview presentation given by Emily. And then we'll have a hands-on session as a large group where we're going to get to work with an ODK questionnaire and learn how to use ODK for the radar questionnaire. And then the second half of the workshop will be focused on the data management and analysis. And we're going to have an overview and presentation of data management analysis for the radar coverage questionnaire, and then a hands-on activity in breakout groups looking at analyzing coverage data. And then finally, we'll come back together at the end to do some feedback and talk about the Google survey and some closing remarks. And we welcome participation, questions, comments, so feel free to step in and ask questions as you have them as we go along. The goal really here is to get your feedback as we're moving towards finalizing some of the toolkit. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass things over to Emily.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly review with two slides what we sort of covered last week and to introduce the radar project. The questions and tools. So there's 5 tools, live save tool, the impact model tool, implementation strength is one, and then quality of care is a second tool, and the coverage survey tool. And these tools were designed to answer different M&E questions. So for the live save tool, we're interested in using that to answer, does the program focus on interventions that will have the greatest impact in the program context? For the impact model tool, we're interested in whether the program is being implemented as planned and at sufficient strength and quality to achieve the expected impact. For the implementation strength and quality of care assessment tools, we're interested in whether services are being utilized by the target population. And for coverage, which we're focused on with this webinar series, we're interested in whether the people who are in need of interventions are receiving them. List also covers whether the expected impact of the program is occurring and tries to get into why or why not that may be. There's sort of also a underlying interest in whether a program that's being implemented is contributing to equity. So this is just a broad overview. And then if we narrow in on that question 4 with the coverage survey tool, we can see that it's made up of its own myriad tools. So you see in the sort of brick wall below here, like brick by brick, we can build different assessments and studies around how to better measure coverage and better use data, and we're conducting these webinars in order to introduce each of these tools. So there's the color coordination here, and last week, for those of you who were able to attend, was the radar coverage survey tool, the broad overview, all the components, kind of a brief introduction to everything it contains. Today we're going to go into an in-depth dive. Well, I say in-depth, we're going to actually just do an introduction, but we're going to focus on the Open Data Kit, which is the CAPI management program, and data processing and analysis of the data that come out of those collection systems. And then next week we'll talk about gender analysis, and there's both a guide and a analysis that we've done with coverage survey data. And finally, on June 9th, we'll focus on the sampling survey tool, the indicator sheets, the sample size calculator, and mapping tools to get adequate sampling to get answers to various questions. Okay, so I'm gonna just refer you again to the website that Talata spoke of last week, and we'll be putting versions of things that, as far as we can get these tools before our grant ends, we will have done so by June 30th, and everything will be up and ready for you to use. And there are some things up there now, and we encourage you to go visit this website at your leisure. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into the questionnaire and ODK. And when we talk about ODK, we're talking about an electronic data capture system. And the acronym here is Computer Assisted Personal Interview. So on the left, you see an interviewer training where paper questionnaires were employed, and I left the timestamp on there so that you could see this is how things were done in 2012, and it was still, you know, widely seen that you would have paper in the field and you'd collect the household data that way. It's rare to see this anymore, and certainly with all of our studies in radar, we've used the electronic version of this method. But the idea is the same, and the predecessor and the starting place for these computer-assisted data collections are, you still design the paper questionnaire, get all the skip patterns, everything correct, and it is a bit front-loaded in that you then have to program the CAPI. But once that's done, you eliminate the double data entry. You have a chance to do kind of real-time course correction if things aren't going well in the field, and interviewers prefer it because it takes into account skip patterns, and it's much more natural once you get in the flow of it than kind of hauling large reams of paper around. Not to mention the timeliness of the results that you can get out of it. So ODK is one of several platforms that allow you to do electronic data capture. It's the one we chose for radar for a number of reasons, and I'm just going to go through them quickly. It's free and it's open source. It has a pretty good users forum and support base, and it's been around a little while, long enough to kind of have people who can help you and who are willing to for free. There's also some third parties that have developed businesses around it, so you could hire them to assist. The forms are written and edited in Excel, which compared to a lot of kind of user interfaces where people have to sort of like learn a new thing just to do their study, this was already familiar to a lot of people globally. The development is ongoing. It began as somebody's sabbatical project who worked at Google in 2008. It moved to a collaboration with the University of Washington in 2009, and now it's entirely supported by a community of users, the way Wikipedia or the statistical analysis software R is supported by a community of users. There is a steering committee that kind of decides what new tools are needed, what needs to be revamped, but it's completely open source in that way, and you can kind of add to the existing technology if you get really into it. This is an overwhelming slide, but by the end of this session, you're gonna intuitively understand this, hopefully. And the main point here is that the ODK system is a series of interconnecting tools that talk to each other. And those tools are the questionnaires, which are the ODK tool is called the XLS form, the server, which we think of as ODK aggregate, the tablets, which run an app called ODK Collect, and a data retrieval process that uses ODK Briefcase. So you could use just one of these tools. You could use them in concert, and they are built to go together. So now we'll talk about each of the tools. And the first one is the ODK questionnaire. So this is a place to start. It's an XLS form is just an Excel sheet with certain worksheets and columns in a specific format. There are typically 3 worksheets, which you'll see in the activity. A survey worksheet contains the questions and includes columns for the type of question, the name, what you're going to call that variable name when you analyze your data, and then a label that is what the interviewer reads to the interviewee. Each row is a question. Typically, I mean, some of the rows might be ancillary kind of operational things that you don't have in your questionnaire that you're trying to calculate the number of eligible women or something. And then the choices worksheet is made up of also 3 columns that have to be there, plus additional options if you wanted to add, if you wanted to make your survey bilingual, trilingual. And the choices worksheet is basically the response options for the interview. And then finally, the settings worksheet specifies a unique name. And you'll see why that's important in our activity. XLS forms are Excel forms, but the way that ODK reads data is in a machine readable form called X forms. So we just do a simple online conversion to get the one we use, the Excel form, into the version ODK uses. Servers are, they've come a long way in the time we've been doing this radar project, but they're still probably the biggest barrier to entry for doing all of this yourself. We use we use interchangeably ODK aggregate and the ODK server. ODK aggregate is technically an app that sits on a server, and we require 3 things to pop up a server. One is an IP address, and maybe you've seen these. They're the often 10-digit codes that uniquely identify a computer. And at the end of the day, a server is just a computer that you're touching with code instead of your keyboard. So it's just a satellite computer, basically. So the IP address is the location of that computer. And then the domain name is what we think of when we think of going to a website. Google is a domain name for something. It's actually pointing to an IP address. And these allow people to kind of maybe specify their project a little bit. You can have something that people will remember related to the server that they're using. ODK aggregate is again the app that is the container for the data that goes in and out of that central part of the ODK tools. And there's a script in the documentation that populates this for you. And there are steps to do this available. We've been using DigitalOcean for the IP address, and if you can buy domain names or you can get them for free at another website, free DNS. But at the end of this 20-minute process of getting a server up. You have a website that links to tablets where you can download the blank forms and upload completed forms. And it also links to ODK Briefcase where you can get your data. So it's just this central component that allows you to do everything on the cloud and also offline when you're not actually connecting to the server. We've learned that because this is a script that's kind of just generic, and everybody's aggregate server starts the same way, you want to change that default username and password when you have your server for your study. We recommend having 2 logins that have full access, just in case somebody either forgets their login, or we'll set up 2 kind of super users to begin with, and give one just for the administrator and one that goes to the field team or anyone, you know, intimately involved in the data collection or analysis. And then we have had some success setting up 2 servers, one as a testing server, and you could even just keep the IP address. You wouldn't have to put a domain name on that. That's just for people to kind of make sure their forms are working correctly and to be able to test it. And then a production server where your final data will go. And then they can be used concurrently if you're still debugging at the time of implementation, which inevitably happens with these types of studies. And then just another quick note on servers. You don't have to use a domain name. We typically do for the production servers for 2 reasons. It makes it easier for people to remember, and it does encrypt the data if someone's looking in the pipes and has, you know, bad intentions. So onto tablets, the third sort of component of that ODK overview. The ODK Collect app is an Android app that replaces paper forms. Once you've installed the app, and unless you're getting your forms from the server or putting your data back on the server, it works without internet. So for the actual interviews, you don't need any connectivity, and you can store data on the app, and then when you're back in an internet area, you can send them to the server. It's flexible, supporting many data types, alphanumeric and numeric data, as well as GPS, location, audio, image, video. And they update this periodically as the user community kind of uses it more and finds things that they'd like to change. And the latest releases, but also the latest releases are on the Google Play Store, and earlier releases can be found on GitHub if you wanted them. You connect to ODK Aggregate to get the blank forms and to upload the completed forms. And we'll go through how to do that as a group in the activity. And then once you're connected, you can do those things, but again, when you're offline, you can still fill out the forms. Finally, the retrieval. So we have the XLS form, which goes on to the server, which goes on to the tablet, which gets the data back to the server. And now we want to get that data down so we can use it, right? So we use ODK Briefcase, which is installed on your desktop, and then you can pull the forms and export the forms. So it's a 2-step process once you've downloaded the Briefcase software. You pull the form you want, because you'll get access to the whole server, so you might not want all the forms that are on there, but you just select the ones you do, and then for your survey of interest or your version of your questionnaire that you're currently on, and then you export those forms, and you'll see that they're now filled with data, and you can then start the process of what Ashely will be talking about, of cleaning and formatting and merging and making it making it sing. So I just want to let you know quickly about the resources, and then we might have a minute or two for questions. The ODK has developed a website that has kind of an announcements and links to its documentation materials, and then here's the link if you wanted to go directly to what they've developed and instructions on how to set up servers and additional links to all of the things that I just mentioned. The ones we're going to be using, I just pulled out. The ones you'll be using in a minute, I've pulled out here. And these are this would help you if you wanted to like figure out how to add a different type of question you haven't used before, but you're not sure like what it's called for that column type, for the type column in the survey worksheet. You could look it up here. And then this is where you would convert your questionnaire when you're done. We have developed kind of a generic core questionnaire that has all the modules we've used in the field, and they connect and they run on a ODK Collect app, and it's quite a big survey, but it could be edited if you wanted to use that for your own household survey. And there's specific processes around, like, recommendations around how we'd advise you to edit this for your own purposes, and that, as well as some of the other kind of lessons learned and documentation that we've developed in terms of things that might be helpful, annexes and supplementary materials to the ODK documentation that already exists are in a Word document that you can also use. And we hope that this documentation will provide somewhat of an orientation, because the documentation materials are great, but they do assume kind of an introductory level of ODK knowledge. So we're adding that and just supporting what's already there. Finally, out of today, we're hoping to get an idea of where the barriers to entry with this are, and what could be better explained, what's harder to learn. And there's a number of Coursera courses coming out of the Radar project, including one for coverage that has a series of modules, one of which will be CAPI. So we'll have a chance to explain things and do things in a little more depth than we will today. And your feedback would be very helpful as we are creating those materials now. Okay, so there's like 1 minute for questions if anybody wants to ask one. Some things will be more clear after we do an activity together, but are there any quick questions that would, before we go into the activity? Sometimes the best way to get more clarity is to try it. So I am going to just run through the quick instructions, and then I'm going to send you 2 things that we'll use to actually work with an XLS form. So again, we're trying to explore ODK tools, and we're doing like a broad overview of all of them. And this is so that we can see how easy or difficult they are to pick up and use. The next slide and then a handout that's going to come in the chat box are going to provide detailed instructions for what we'll be doing. And there's an overview, and then there's more in-depth kind of screenshots and stuff if you want a little more guidance. And we'll try to kind of do part 1 in 10 minutes. And then I'm going to go through a group demo with part 2, where we'll go through the ODK Collect part. Just because that requires an Android operating system, and I didn't want you to have to download software today, but you'll have the instructions there if you wanted to do it as we go through it as a group, or if you want to do it later, that's available to you. So I'm going to give you a version of this. Let me get back to the main screen, and I'm actually going to send this to you right now. So here are the activity instructions, and then you'll need one other thing, which is kind of a sample XLSX form, which we are going to adapt and just kind of get our feet wet with. So let me pull that up. Okay, so there are two things in your chat box. One is called activity using ODK tools with today's date, and the other is a coffee questionnaire with an XLSX extension. And if you'll just download these both right now, and then I'm going to pull them up and share the screen, and we can go through it, the instructions together. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again now with the activity instead of the slides. Okay, so if you've had a chance to download the instructions, can everyone see this part 1 here?
Yes, we can.
I can see it.
Okay, so the activity overview, we're just going to create a questionnaire, which is the coffee questionnaire. If you open it, it's a bit unprepossessing at first, but we're going to go through it, and you can see like what each component here does. And then we're going to convert this to a form that ODK tools can read, and then we're going to put that on a sandbox server that's, your work will stay there for 24 hours. So just to let you know, this is a testing server that ODK has set up that is not, it's very impermanent. They wipe it, you know, roughly every 1 to 2 days, but they do allow you to kind of test stuff out. So, you know, if you don't want to commit to your own server yet, which does require like either a subscription to DigitalOcean or something like that. So, okay, so if you've got this coffee questionnaire, were people able to download it from the, from the chat box?
I assume so. I was able to.
Yep,
I
was.
have a yes.
I'm seeing people saying yes in the chat box, so looks
great. Okay, so so let's just go through in the more detailed section. If you look at the 3 tabs, we have survey, and this is going to be just a simple, this is kind of where your paper questionnaire would come in. These labels would be your questions from your questionnaire with variable names in the name column, and then the type of question, be it a select yes or no, or enter an integer. And these yes, no, for example, will correspond to the choices tab. So select 1 is the question type, and yes, no is the question group here. So 1 is yes, 2 is no.
Actually,
And
Emily,
then,
could you zoom in just a little bit?
Yes.
Thanks.
Definitely.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So if we wanted to just kind of quickly go through what types of questions do we see, there's There's select one, yes, no. There's an integer for how many cups of coffee did you drink yesterday. And you'll see that in these ODK questionnaires can be quite complex. So this one's pretty simple, but it still has these additional columns where you can, if yes is required to answer, for example, how many cups of coffee did you drink yesterday? And it's only relevant to people who answered question 3 with a 1 for yes. And then you could add additional questions in this as rows here. You would have to pick a unique name, and then if it was a flat questionnaire with no reference to other questions, you could just add your question label. But you can hopefully start to imagine how these things do kind of become complex, and you'll want to make sure that each question is talking to each other. And you'll see many examples of this in the coverage questionnaire we're providing. So if you will, if you're interested and you want to actually have the experience of uploading a questionnaire, let's add in the form title your initials and your organization. And the form title will appear in one part of aggregate and the form ID will appear in the other one. I often just use the same. So let me zoom in again. And you can feel free to do this for your initials and organization. And this is just to distinguish whose questionnaire is whose. And then we'll want to save this. And then if we go to the convert, so step 1 was just to kind of make this your own, however you want to do that. Just at least change the ID. And then once you've saved that, if you go to the Get ODK, this link in step 2, you'll come to a website that looks a bit bare bones, but it does what we needed to do. And if you choose your file from your wherever you saved it on your desktop, you'll see, sorry, let me save. Okay, so you'll see it pull up your coffee questionnaire. And then if you submit this, it'll take a minute. It'll take longer if you have a more complex survey, but this one should be pretty quick. And you'll have the option to download an X form. And this is, again, just the version that ODK tools use. So I'm going to put that somewhere locally that I can access it easily. And then I'm going to upload it to aggregate. So if you click on the step 3 link, you'll get the sandbox server. And you can go to form management, add new form, choose your XML file. And it should have an XML extension. And if you upload that form, you'll get sometimes you'll get an error message that says like you have duplicate variables or something. But if things have been working, if you're testing it pretty frequently, you'll hopefully get like a confirmation that it uploaded. So then we just X out of this, and you can see this is the one I was testing yesterday. This is the one I've added my initials to. We have MKM here. And if anyone, I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to just try that. If you wanted to, now would be a chance to sort of take an XLS form and put it on a server. Anyone else wants to do that today. But it really is just a matter of the kind of these two links, one to convert your form and one to populate the server. And the form management just shows you what's available. And this is using your form ID. And then the submissions will be able to see, for example, these are blank forms, but we're going to actually add some data to one of them once people have a chance to add theirs if they want to. Okay, so we have some participants, and I'm just going to take an example and go through part two. So this is optionally, if you have an Android device and you'd like to try this out on your own, you can download ODK Collect from the Google Play Store, and you can download Briefcase from GitHub. I am watching the time because I don't want to run into Ashely's session. So I was just going to take you through what this looks like once your forms are on the server, what the next steps are. And you can just watch, or you can, do this later on your own. But we're gonna now switch to an Android screen here. So this is just a tablet that has ODK Collect on it already. You would, if you needed to get this, you could just go to the Google Play Store and then search for ODK Collect and then download it. And then you'd have it here. And so what we're gonna do now is, it's a pretty robust app. Once it's downloaded, you can connect to a server by going to General Settings, Server, and then here we have the type of server. So you could also use Google Drive for this, which is talked about in the documentation, but not in this example. And then the URL, we're just going to use, this will be the same as the one we just looked at. So this is this URL up to org. And I'm going to click OK. And then if you had any server other than the Sandbox server, basically you'd have to put in a username and password, but that's another thing that's nice about this. You don't need it. So then we just click the back button. And we're going to try to get that blank form off of the server so it'll connect. And quite a few people have put up their demo. So I'm just going to randomly select MMJGI as our questionnaire for the day. And what we would do here is, you see that we're getting every form from aggregate. And what we want is just one for now will do us. So I'm gonna just toggle them off and then get that one selected one. And then the next step, once you have your form, is to fill it. And for this, I could disconnect the wireless and I would be able to fill it because it's actually on the tablet, not the server. Well, it's also on the server. And I'm just gonna fill this in. And I'm gonna guess you did drink coffee, but self-reporting. And that you had 2 cups. And that you like lots of sugar. And that you have a brother named Albert who also likes coffee. and that's it. And so now I don't want to add any more siblings, although I could, or household members or bed nets, but this is just a simple demo today. So is this correct? Yes. And then when you get to the end of a survey, when you naturally come to the last question in the questionnaire, you'll get this, it'll default at the mark that your form is finalized and you want to save and exit. Okay, so then we're going to send that finalized form back to the server, and I'm going to pull that back up so you can see how things change here. And we're just going to send the finalized form, and we're already connected to the server. So I'm going to send the selected one. We don't need phone calls for this. There are surveys that you want to enable that. And then you're going to get a confirmation that it's sent. And we can just double check if we refresh the screen over here. That we see some semblance of our data. It's gonna you know, look a little strange, and we'll clean that up. It's in a very raw form, but there it is. So if you had 2 forms that you sent, you would see 2 rows here, and so on. Okay, so now very quickly, because I do want to leave a little time at the end, we're just going to talk about briefcase. So we've gotten our form, we've filled out our form, we've sent it back to the server, we have data on the server, and now we want that to clean and analyze. So you can download this. Briefcase is not as, you get it from GitHub, not Google Play. It feels like it's still a little bit more in development, but it has worked for our purposes. So let me just pull up Briefcase, which is the last of the tools we're talking about today. And you have, again, the option of pulling from several places, and we want the aggregate server. So we're gonna, again, get that link.
And again, because excuse me, sorry to interrupt. This is Melody from CanWaCH. There's a question in the chat box for your attention, please. Okay. Thanks.
Are you able to see it, Emily, or do you want one of us to read it to you?
If someone could read it, I'm having a little trouble switching screens.
Sure. So it says, once the data is saved, if you find an error, for example, the integer is 150 instead of 15, could you edit as it is in the server? So the question is, can you edit data on the server once they've been sent?
So if we go back to the, once I've sent my finalized form, you no longer have it to edit. So before we send it, there's an option to edit a saved form. But once we send it to the server, there's not an option to get a filled form in ODK. There's another whole suite of tools called ODKX where that is an option. That is something that people have brought up as that what they would like to see in the future, but that is unidirectional from the tablet back to the server with the filled out forms. That's then you'd have to, I guess, handle that in the data cleaning. Good question. Okay, so we're connecting briefcase to the server. And then we're gonna have the option of, again, everything that's there now, as well as some other stuff that was on briefcase that I downloaded from other servers. So what we want to do is just pull the form we want off the server. And then once we've done that, we can export that same form. And I usually like to check to just make sure that where the directory where I think it's going is where it is going, and you can change this easily with the default configurations. You also have some options here. If you had geographic location, you would want to include the GeoJSON files. You could overwrite your existing files, or if you were appending, then you would definitely not want to check that. And then once we have things the way we want them, you can just click export, and it should appear in your directory. So here we go. There's 2 forms in the data directory that we specified, and they because we had the sibling part that was actually like a subform of the regular form, it gives us these two sheets that Ashely will go into more detail about how you kind of put the raw data back together in a usable way. So here we have the first part, and then the brother-sister module separately. And the parent key is to allow you, let's say you were doing a 10,000 household survey, you'd probably want to link these at some point, or aspects of them, and that would allow you to do that, as well as a unique identifier. So that is the bare bones of the operational parts of the ODK tools. And we just have a little time, so I did want to, I know it's kind of a lot to take in, and if you haven't seen this before, I apologize it's so quick today, but I did want to cover kind of the A to Z tools that are available, and then there will be a lot more detail and use cases as we've learned from the Radar project, available for you to read at your leisure with the guide we're providing. Let me try to stop sharing so I can see the chat box in case there are other things.
So Emily, maybe while people are thinking of their questions, there's just one point I wanted to add in. It was a great overview. One, I think, as you said, we have tried to, we used ODK in part because to make it easier for people to add and remove questions relative to other platforms. But one minor but important thing for people to keep in mind is that you cannot change, or you should not change question numbers when you are adding or removing questions. So if you want to insert a question, say between question CB2 and CB3, you don't want to renumber all the questions in that module from CB3 onward, because it will break all the skips. So that's just something minor to make sure that you are being careful about if you do decide to use this questionnaire, as it will also impact on the analysis tools, as Ashely will talk about in a minute.
Yes. The code, it's so integrated, and where a question may be used is something you don't want to underestimate. If once you have 1,000 rows there instead of the like 10 we were looking at with the coffee questionnaire. So it's easier to think of like novel names and then add them, or not worry about having things go sequentially. If you wanted to move HA 5 and 6, just have it go from 4 to 7. Don't worry about the fact that there's not a 5 and 6, because they may be, because then you'd have to renumber all 1,000 lines of your questionnaire to be a pain, among other things.
Hello, Emily. This is Melody from CanWaCH. Related to the question that was asked there regarding 150 instead of 15, you did mention some of the advantages of electronic data collection, like skip patterns. Another advantage I wonder if you can talk about is the setting of realistic ranges, so acceptable ranges. So for example, there, the 150 would be detected because it would be outside of the acceptable range. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So if you use paper questionnaire and you ask for date of birth, you might get something like the kid was born in month number 18, just because someone's handwriting they meant 12, but the 8 kind of looks like, the 2 looks like an 8. And this is an issue for paper, handwriting, and also just if things are canonically in set, like months, or like you might offer a don't know, but you don't want to offer unlimited choices. You can set this all up in the choices tab so that anything outside of that range, and if you were to type 3 in your coffee questionnaire for a yes/no question, it would say, please include a valid response. So this is a way to ensure some data quality at the point of contact with the actual interview participants. Oh, so Tamrat is bringing up the good point that electronic typing is also vulnerable to mistakes, and that's true. It guards against out of range options. It doesn't guard against putting in June when you meant April. So there are some prompts and things we use where we're really trying to get a specific guide the person being interviewed to a very accurate response. Sometimes we'll put in a second question that corroborates or brings up an inconsistency in an earlier question, which is another kind of layer of data quality at the time of interview. And you can reconcile, well, the birth date given by the head of household in the household questionnaire was different from the one given by the individual in the women's questionnaire. So which is it? And you can reconcile things like that with electronic.
So I just want to add, we're not going to talk about it today, but we do have a whole set of procedures for kind of data quality checking in the field, for both kind of supervisor data quality checks and then some real-time data quality checks that are aimed at sort of looking for some of these outlier values and whatnot. The electronic questionnaire, you're right, can only do so much, and then some of it is we need to be doing good data quality control and management and supervision. So we're not going to cover that aspect of the data piece today, but we will have a bunch of materials on that component as well available.
Yeah, and as Emily said, there are a number of checks that are programmed in addition to sort of general range checks, verifying that age and date of birth are consistent, that if a mother is reporting the date of her last birth, that it's not before her date of birth, or it didn't happen when she was 5 years old. So the application will flag. The data collector will get an error message for some questions, if they enter something that is very inconsistent. But obviously that doesn't preclude the possibility of any errors in data entry.
Yeah, just to weigh in addition to the internal check-in in ODK, it's also best to also think when you use data collections using CAPI, to also think trying to have some platform where you should be able to also monitor the data quality. So you can try to focus on some Stata or R or SPSS code, or where you can download the data on a regular basis, and then check the data quality per cluster, per interviewer, per team, and this is one way. Or if you have more ability, you can also have your own dashboard, okay, to monitor data quality in addition to the check that are already in ODK.
Well, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Ashely because we're right at 1:01, and I know she has a PAC program as well. But any feedback you have, would be very interested in incorporating it in the finalization of this, particularly if you've used ODK before and you want to use it again and have others who are new to it join you. So I'll stop sharing here.
Great, thanks, Emily. I'm going to share my screen, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and share a link in the chat box that's for some of the resources for the data management analysis session. And then I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right, so shifting now a little bit towards the data management and analysis. I think where we left off with Emily was that you've collected your data in ODK and you've been able to download and export your data from your ODK server. And what you get if you've implemented the full radar questionnaire is a number of different CSV files. And so the maximum number of files, if all of these modules have been implemented, is 8 files. And so for the household piece of the questionnaire, you're always going to have your household file. Then for all of the household members, there is an additional file. There's also a file that has information on household assets and water and sanitation. And then there's also a file related to mosquito nets, if that module was implemented. And then depending on which additional modules have been implemented, you may have the women's questionnaire, men's questionnaire, child questionnaire, and a questionnaire for the anthropometry. And as Emily mentioned, all of these data files can be linked through a unique household and respondent ID variables that have been auto-generated by ODK. And you can import these CSV files into any statistical package for further data management and analysis. So what we want to cover in this session is just a bit of an overview of the data management and analysis process. And so we kind of want to talk through what are the different steps and what are the tools that we've put together to make those steps a little bit easier. So we're going to walk through starting with cleaning variable names, what we call final data cleaning, data preparation, archiving the data set, indicator generation, and then finally data analysis. So for the data processing and analysis, we've made all of these tools available as a series of Stata do file scripts. And we use Stata because it's a relatively straightforward to use software. It's a bit of an easier learning curve relative to other software such as R. So that's why we chose it. The issue is provided that the variable names don't change, you can run these scripts largely on the outputs from the radar ODK questionnaire. So whatever changes that you make in your adaptation phase, if you start with the radar ODK questionnaire, you'll need to make those same changes in these data processing and analysis scripts. So to reiterate what Melinda said, If you change the numbering of the core radar ODK questionnaire, you will need to update everything in these scripts, which is another reason why it's really recommended that you don't change the numbering. You can add, country-specific numbering for your implementation, but that you kind of leave the numbering because those question numbers are linked through this entire data analysis and processing procedure as well. So these processing and analysis scripts are going to be available on the Radar website when they're finalized. We have some draft working versions that are actually in a Dropbox, which I put the link in the chat window for now. They're still a work in progress. Some are more finalized than others, but as we're making some tweaks to the final questionnaire and the final indicators documents, they're still being finalized. But we wanted to give you guys an opportunity to see the resources as they are today, as we're working towards finalization. So the first step, cleaning variable names. So as you saw, when you get the ODK CSV file, the variable names are not always super intuitive. And so this very first step of data management imports each of those CSV files from ODK and cleans up the variable names to ensure the variables adhere to a standard naming convention based on the question numbers from the questionnaire. And so again, a note, this is super important. The processing and analysis scripts are designed to run on the Radar ODK questionnaire. So if the variable names are changed in the ODK questionnaire, all the scripts have to be updated or rewritten. And so this data do file for cleaning variable names is called one_clean_variable_names.do. And it'll largely run on its own. You will have to make some small adaptations to reflect additions or deletions made during the questionnaire adaptation process. The second step is going to be the final data cleaning, and it's going to be divided into two parts. The first part of final data cleaning is labeling variables, labeling value sets, so giving those ones and twos, yeses and nos, looking to assess any system or administrative variables and considering which ones to drop, which things you don't need to maintain in your final data set. We're going to calculate dates as century, month, day codes, checking that the response options are correct. We have some multi-response option questions that we're going to want to recode. We have binary variables that are yes/no variables that have generally been coded as 1 yes, 2 no, that we want to recode as 0 no, 1 yes. And so all of these steps are part of our kind of final data cleaning procedures, part A. And there's a data file that's called 2A final data cleaning that takes care of these procedures. So again, some adaptation is going to be required to reflect additions or deletions made during your questionnaire adaptation process. But largely, it's minimal adaptation required to implement script 2A. Then we have final data cleaning part B, and this is really focused on consistency checks. So this is looking at survey completeness, identifying and removing any duplicate records, identifying incomplete records, checking that skip patterns have been consistently followed, checking responses are within a range based on your questionnaire, checking that GPS coordinates are within a range of your country and potentially region or district. And a lot of this is largely programmed of the last 3 into your electronic data questionnaire ranges, but it's good to take a double check before you finalize your data set. However, these checks are really difficult to automate because they're often survey or country specific. And so we've put together some example code to conduct some of these consistency checks in this data file called 2B, final data cleaning. But this really has to be reviewed for each survey implementation and fully adapted. And so that's why we've split 2A versus 2B, where 2A is minor adaptation and 2B is much more example code with major adaptation required. So once our final data cleaning is done, we're ready to move to what we call data preparation, which really includes these kind of following steps. One is merging questionnaires. So we saw that our questionnaire comes from ODK in 8 different pieces, and we may need to include sections, for example, from the household module across your women's, your man's, your child's data sets. So for example, we might want to include information on wealth quintiles in our women's and our child files so that we can conduct an equity analysis on women and child specific indicators. And that requires merging information between modules. We're also going to want to calculate our wealth index. We're going to need to create some categorical variables. For example, we're going to want some age variables that are categorical, education, marital status, etc. And so we've created a do file that's called 3A, data preparation. It does these steps for you. And again, these are kind of light adaptations required that reflects country-specific changes. We also have a part 3B to data preparation. And this includes creating variables related to the survey design. And when we say survey design, we're really talking about looking at your sampling strata and your survey weights. And so we do have a script available that's called 3B data preparation. And this has more example code, but again, really needs to be reviewed and adapted for each survey implementation as survey designs vary and it's not something we can pre-specify. So once your data preparation is complete, the next step is usually to do some data archiving. You really now have a data set that's cleaned, your data preparation is complete, you have a final data set, and generally we recommend doing data archiving so it can be properly used for future use. So archiving generally includes removing any identifiers from the data set. That could be names, date of birth, either displacing or removing GPS coordinates depending on your institutional policies. Exporting the data set to various file formats to make it usable for future users, whether that's Excel or R, Stata, SAS, etc. And then creating a README file that explains the contents of the data set and how the data sets can be used collectively with each other. And finally, we recommend that you save the data set, the README file, and the questionnaire used to collect the data together. And you might want to consider a publicly accessible repository to save the information. At a minimum, we really want to save the information in some sort of shared folder and not just on a single computer. And so we've put together some code in the Stata do file that's called for data archiving that helps with the process of removing identifiers and exporting the data set. And again, some minor adaptations are required to reflect country-specific and survey implementation-specific adaptations. And then we're going to move on to indicator generation. And so for indicator generation, we actually have a radar indicator sheets document, which provides detailed indicator definitions for the core radar indicators. And so this provides indicator definitions corresponding to the numerator, the denominator, and also the specific questions from your questionnaire that correspond to both numerators and denominators for the core indicators. And there are around 60-ish or so indicators detailed in the indicators document. So the indicators document is currently available on the web. We also have a Stata script that generates those core indicators. It's called 5 indicator generation. And it does properly account for numerators and denominators. It will require some adaptations, again, to reflect additions or deletions made during the questionnaire adaptation. And it will also require some indicators that have country-specific responses that need adaptation. So for example, the definition of which cadres of health workers counts as skilled health providers may differ between countries. So if you're looking at an indicator of skilled birth attendance, you may need to adapt that indicator definition in the script. So just to give you an example of what this might look like, on the left, we have an example of an indicator from the radar indicator sheets document. And on the right, we have an example of corresponding code in our Stata do file script. So on the left, you can see the indicator here, skilled attendant at birth. And we have the definition as the percentage of births attended by skilled health personnel. We have a detailed definition for the numerator and the denominator. And then it also tells us what question numbers specifically from the radar questionnaire are contributing to the numerator and the denominator. So for the numerator, we can see it's CB16 and the denominator is FE3. And then we have some detailed notes about who counts and how is the numerator and denominator specifically defined. And then when we look at the code on the right, we can see how this information has been operationalized in code to actually generate the indicator. And we're actually going to look at this in a lot more detail in our hands-on exercise for today. So once all of your indicators have been generated, we can move towards data analysis. And so the data analysis should really follow some sort of tabulation plan to create our results in our tables and figures. Ideally, we're going to do some tabulations of indicators and then also cross tabulations by key strata such as geographic area, education, wealth, etc. And then some data visualizations to display the key findings. Often more in-depth analyses to assess associations are also considered after review of initial findings and some sort of decision about what are the important findings and things that warrant further investigation. It's really important to note that all analyses must account for the complex survey design. So just thinking back to survey design, each survey implementation may have a different survey design. You may have stratified your sample by urban and rural and or administrative area. You may have sampled clusters within strata. You probably sampled households within the clusters. For at each household, for the women and child questionnaires, all eligible individuals in sampled households were interviewed if you followed the radar methodology. And then for the man and the anthropometry questionnaires, the design can be to interview all eligible individuals in a certain percentage of sampled households. It's usually typically 50%, and it depends on the indicators of interest. And so all of these parameters of how you implemented your survey design need to be taken into account. Depending on how you stratified and how you sampled clusters, different households have had different probabilities of being sampled. As a result of this, our data analysis must account for this survey design to produce accurate estimates. And when we say take into account survey design, we mean accounting for our sampling weights or the probability of selection, clustering, and stratification. And so we put together an analysis script that's called 6 data analysis that provides example code for how to account for your survey design using the survey set commands and how to do survey weighted tabulations. In Stata, it's example code, but again, it needs to be reviewed and adapted for each survey implementation as your survey designs will vary. So that's the end of kind of the overview of the survey process for data processing and analysis. What we really wanted to do is spend the next chunk of time on a hands-on session, which hopefully is a little bit more interesting. But before we do that, are there any questions? I know that was a pretty quick overview. Okay, maybe as we start working on the activity, there'll be a few more questions. So we have a tool that's going to help us with the activity today. It's called Stats Report. It's a collaborative space for transparent and replicable analysis. Some of our colleagues at JHU developed it. It's been used across a number of projects. And it's basically a place where we're able to upload our data sets, our indicator generation scripts, and our data analysis scripts so that you guys can run them, you can explore the code, you can explore the outputs, but you don't have to install any software on your computer. You don't have to purchase any software. So we're going to be using Stats Report today to help us with an activity to actually be able to explore some of these scripts so you can actually see what's in them, how do they work, what do you get out of them, and maybe some of this will be a little bit more concrete and interesting to think about. So just to note, what we uploaded into Stats Report is just for our activity purposes. It's not the full scripts, which will be available on the Radar website when they're finalized, and then what's available now is in the Dropbox link. So I am going to share a link to download the activity. But just a little background, the idea of the activity was designed so that you guys can explore indicator generation and analysis example scripts. And then for our team to understand how easy or not easy the tools are for people to use. And we'd love any feedback on that as you guys kind of work through the activity. So there are detailed instructions. I'm going to share them in the chat window. The first page has kind of an overview of the tasks, and then there's detailed step-by-step screenshots for the rest of it. And for the activity, we're going to break into small groups so that people can work together on the activity. We'll give you guys 20 to 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to return to the larger group for a short discussion and an opportunity to provide feedback. But feel free to turn on your videos, microphone, share screens. The idea is to kind of work collaboratively through the activity together, pretty informally. And so the idea for the activity is you're going to be able to use the radar indicator sheet and the questionnaire, and we've provided links to download both of those from the website, to identify questions that would be required to measure a selected indicator. And that's the first step. And then you're going to be able to use Stats Report to run the indicator generation scripts and generate the selected indicator. The third step is you're going to look at exploring the radar indicator generation script to determine if the questions that you identified from step 1 were actually utilized in the indicator generation scripts. And then finally, you're going to be able to use Stats Report to actually generate an estimate of coverage for your indicator of interest using the complex survey design. And you'll be able to create a national estimate. You'll be able to create an estimate disaggregated by urbanicity and disaggregated by wealth quintile. And then you'll also be able to create a couple of charts, bar chart disaggregated by urban rural, and an equiplot as well with disaggregated by wealth quintile. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share the activity in the chat box and maybe see if there's any questions before we send people to breakout groups.
Thanks, Ashely. As you're doing that, I'll encourage everybody to download a copy of the file that Ashely is sharing, just because sometimes when we go into breakout rooms, you can lose the chat history. So take a moment and download that. And so Ashely, I'm ready to move us into breakout rooms, I hope successfully, whenever you're ready. We're at 1:24 right now. Do you want the breakout rooms to go for the 25 minutes?
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Okay, great. So hopefully with success, I'll move us all into breakout rooms. You'll have 25 minutes. There will be a countdown that prompts you to come back to this main room with 1 minute to go. So you'll see something momentarily popping up on your screen. Just accept that, and it will move you over to that discussion. All right, welcome back, everybody. Great to have you. And Ashely, I think that's most people joined back. So back over to you.
Great, thanks. I think we just have, a few minutes left, and we really wanted to kind of give people an opportunity to share some feedback about what they've seen presented today and from the activities, to kind of ask, how easy to use do the tools appear to be? Are there things that you have experienced as particular barriers in terms of data collection and analysis that you want to kind of highlight for us so we can try to provide some additional resources, and just kind of your general feedback so far from today. So I welcome any questions or comments or general feedback from the group.
And just a reminder, if you want to share your thoughts, you're welcome to take yourself off of mute or raise your hand if you'd like, or write your questions in the chat. Looks like that gave us some chat questions here. We have a question here about the language of the tools. That they are in French and English, but what about Spanish or other languages? We also have a question here about would SPSS compatibility be considered and connections there. And then finally, does the guidance for ODK include how to use it when there isn't access to Wi-Fi? 3 great questions.
Great. Maybe I'll take the first 2 and then let Emily answer the last one. In terms of language, I think that we have the tools currently programmed in English, French, and Swahili. It's certainly compatible with adding any other languages you want. You would just have to do the translation and then copy paste the translated tools. I don't think we have it in Spanish because we hadn't had demand from any Spanish-speaking countries. But that's certainly something that could be easily adapted into the existing tools. In terms of SPSS compatibility, yeah, we really struggle with which software to pick. Some people like Stata, some people like SPSS, some people like R. And in terms of the data analysis tools, we had to pick something. So we went with Stata as it was kind of on the usability threshold that was user-friendly. And that was something that's widely used amongst a lot of the people that we work with. It does have a compatibility issue that, yeah, these scripts are not going to run in SPSS. And so it's something that we can definitely consider and think about issues around compatibility there. So point taken.
Regarding the use of the ODK with or without Wi-Fi, the majority of the time spent on the tools and like programming the XLS form or collecting the data with even in a very long household interview can all be done offline. There's a few key junctures that require the access to the server, for example, to get the forms and to send the forms back to the server. There's no way around that in terms of having to have a Wi-Fi connection to use it. There are some options. There are a couple places where you'll have the choice. For example, converting your XLS form to an X form. There's an online and an offline converter. So you would have there everywhere that there is an option for not using Wi-Fi. We have made a point of that in case that's the limitation.
And just to add to what Emily said, so yeah, there are specific points where you need a Wi-Fi connection, like when you're downloading the initial questionnaire and when you're uploading questionnaires. But in the field, the data collectors do not need to be connected to Wi-Fi to administer the tool, right? It's just when you're uploading the completed questionnaires, and we've done this in very low electrification, low network access settings, rural Burkina Faso, rural Mali, rural Tanzania, where, yes, sometimes they would go a couple days without being able to connect to the network and upload, but eventually, they were able to, and they were able to get their questionnaires on the server. So we have found it to be feasible to use even in fairly low connectivity settings.
I think we have an additional comment in the chat box about SPSS being used to have SPSS used to have issues with properly using survey sampling weights. Not sure if that has been fixed. It's been a few years, but it was an issue. I think just as a contributing comment.
Yeah, it's a good comment. It's been quite a while since I've used SPSS, so I'm not sure what their current status is in terms of the survey analysis commands. And just to echo what Ashely said, if there is sort of strong demand for another statistical platform, that's something that we could consider. We have been considering, we've talked a number of times about making it available in R as well, because R is free and Stata and other platforms are not. But R also is somewhat more trickier to use. So And we haven't sort of gotten overwhelming demand for it for a particular statistical package. So yeah.
So another question, if we're using a consultant to implement the survey, is it better to ask that they're experienced in using Stata? It's a good question. Yeah, I think if you're gonna plan to use the package of tools and you would like them to use the data processing and analysis scripts that are being made available, yes, that would be a really great qualification for them to have.
While we're waiting to see if there's any final questions before we wrap up, I'll just make the quick note, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we will be sending around a survey following this session. If you attended the first session, you would have received a similar one, but we'll still ask that you take a bit of time to respond to that, and it'll also be a place for you to ask any other questions that come to your mind, and we'll make sure to document the answers to those and get them out to folks together with the follow-up recordings as well. So it's not your only chance to ask questions. All right, seeing no other questions in the chat. Ashely, I see we're coming up on 2 o'clock. Were there any final comments that you wanted to share, or any final points to make before we wrap up?
No, just thanks everyone for the feedback, and we really appreciate all your participation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us again today. I'm just putting up on this slide the contact information for Melinda and Talata, who've been working closely with us here at CanWaCH to deliver this training. But Emily and Ashely, thank you so much for taking us through the ODK today. And we know that we can put folks in touch with yourselves if you're open to that for further follow-up questions. Next week, for those of you that will be joining us, we'll be going into, and this came up quite a lot in the first session, looking at gender analyses and sex disaggregation. So we'll be doing that again at the same time next Tuesday. And again, if you're registered for that, be on the lookout for an email from me with details and the link to that session. And again, as I say, all 4 sessions will be available online. So even if you're not joining us next week, we will be able to send you the recordings when they are available. So thank you again. Thank you to the folks at Johns Hopkins, the Radar team, for this presentation. Thanks to all of you for taking the time. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we will see you next week.